Hi, this is Pastor Josh of First Baptist of Queen. Thank you for joining us as we walk verse by verse through the entire Old Testament. Today we are starting in 1 Samuel chapter 19, verse 19. Picking up with, in this chapter, a lot of drama is happening. Saul is now actively pursuing David. David is on the run from Saul as Saul's trying to kill him. So here in verse 19, we see David has gone out to Ramah, the hometown of Samuel, and they have gone up to Naioth, which is like a little worship center for the prophets there. And so let's join that here in verse 19. And it was told Saul, "Behold, David is at Naioth in Ramah." Then Saul sent messengers to take David. And when they saw the company of the prophets prophesying and Samuel standing as head over them, the Spirit of God came upon the messengers of Saul, and they also prophesied. So apparently here, either someone had seen David go to Naioth, or possibly someone from Naioth saw David in the city and went to tell Saul, who was only 3 miles away. Saul may think that simply because David is so close that apprehending him will prove quite easy. So he sends some of his messengers out to the neighboring town to arrest David and bring him back. We do not know who exactly these messengers are, but these are from the same group of guys that had been sent to watch David's house earlier. So David had been able to escape with his wife's help while some of the messengers were waiting outside his house. And these may have been simply messengers who had been deputized to take care of David, or this type of police action may have been their primary job responsibility, that they simply bore the title of messenger. They may have been some rough characters who could be entrusted to track down and seize the enemies of the crown. Whoever they were, Saul trusted them enough to go and take the man whom he considered to be his greatest threat. And these messengers walk into Naioth with the evil intent assigned to them by Saul. They see the group of prophets from Naioth worshiping and prophesying with Samuel leading them. Then all of a sudden, the Spirit who had been with Saul and left, then had come on David, came on every single one of the messengers, and they all instantly start to prophesy. We're not told what their prophecies included, but as prophecies, they may have been praises to God and rebukes of each other, and maybe even rebukes of Saul. So this worship service, it had swelled at the coming of the Spirit on those who were coming to disrupt God's work. In addition, this is the Spirit intervening to protect David and God's ultimate plan for the people. Look at verse 21. When it was told Saul, he sent other messengers, and they also prophesied. And Saul sent messengers again the third time, and they also prophesied. Then he himself went to Ramah and came to the great well that is in Secu, and he asked, "Where are Samuel and David?" And one said, "Behold, they are at Naioth in Ramah." So someone had been watching the messengers arrive and go up to Naioth, and this someone had apparently seen the messengers all start prophesying before Samuel. And this person reported back to Saul. Maybe this was even the person who had reported about David coming to Naioth at Ramah earlier. And Saul hears the report and very quickly dispatches another group of his messengers to do the job. This second group is also overwhelmed by the Spirit and join in the worship service. So someone reports this activity to Saul, and he sends a third group who also succumb to the Spirit's intervention. Notice that these messengers had all come under the influence of the king of Israel and could not help but fall under the influence of an even greater king. Now, Saul feels as though his only recourse is to come and take care of the situation himself. And none of his otherwise trustworthy messengers have been able to do anything that he wanted. So Saul picks up and decides to travel the 3 miles to the city of Ramah. Now, between Gibeah and Ramah is the well of Secu, which was a source of water for much of that region. So this well most likely would have had quite a few people around it waiting to draw their water. And Saul asked for specifics about the whereabouts of David and Samuel. He had already been told where they were, but he still stops to ask Anyway, maybe he was hoping that they might have departed and gone elsewhere since the three groups of his messengers had gone and not returned. But he hears what he already knew, that Samuel and David are still in Naioth. Verse 23. And he went there to Naioth in Ramah, and the Spirit of God came upon him also. And as he went, he prophesied until he came to Naioth in Ramah. And he too stripped off his clothes, and he too prophesied before Samuel, and lay naked all that day and all that night. Thus it is said, is Saul also among the prophets? So if Saul really wants David, he has no choice but to ascend the hill and enter Naioth, which he does. And again, the same thing happens to him that has happened to each of the groups from him previously. The Spirit comes on Saul, and the prophecies start to spill out of him as well. And now, keep in mind that Saul has not experienced the Spirit since he had been repeatedly resistant to the Spirit's direction. So the Spirit had left him because he unrepentantly and unashamedly did not want to listen to the voice of the Lord. And now, all of a sudden, he is bombarded with the return of the power of the Spirit in one instant. So praises and prophecies pour out of him uncontrollably. But notice, Saul's reception of the Holy Spirit is different from the groups of messengers that he had sent. They had all received the Holy Spirit when they came to Naioth, but not so with Saul. The Spirit comes on him after he leaves the well and before he came to Naioth. While he's on the way to Naioth, the Spirit comes on him and he starts to prophesy on the journey. God's Spirit is not ever limited to a certain particular place or a certain particular circumstance. He can do whatever, wherever, he thinks something is necessary to fulfill his plan. The messengers had all received the Spirit in Naioth, but Saul receives him on the way. When he finally does arrive, he takes off his clothes and he lays down and keeps right on prophesying throughout the whole ordeal. And though Saul had thought that he could in the past, no one can set themselves against the Spirit and win. Now, back in 1 Samuel chapter 15, verse 23, Saul was said to have rejected the word of the Lord. And now here in chapter 19, he was speaking the word of the Lord. It was so powerful an experience that it seeped into the culture, into their phrases of the day, that even Saul prophesies. You know, that they said that even someone like Saul could be found among the prophets. That was to say that something extremely unlikely was happening, or someone extremely unlikely was doing something for the Lord. Look at chapter 20, verse 1. Then David fled from Naioth in Ramah and came and said before Jonathan, "What have I done? What is my guilt? And what is my sin before your father that he seeks my life?" And he said to him, "Far from it. You shall not die. Behold, my father does nothing, either great or small, without disclosing it to me. And why should my father hide this from me? It is not so." So having been saved from 4 attempts on his life in one day, David leaves Naioth while Saul and his men are still there, and he seeks out Jonathan for help and advice. The passage doesn't specifically tell us where Jonathan is at the time, but it can be safely surmised that Jonathan is just back in Saul's capital of Gibeah. And David's immediate question is a desire to know exactly what he has done to offend Saul so much to deserve being hunted for execution. Maybe David really was so pure of heart that it would never have crossed his mind to consider what Saul wanted, that Saul wanted to kill him because he had been anointed by Samuel. Maybe he thought that no one else could have known about the anointing. Maybe he thought that everyone thought as he did about removing the current anointed king as an action against the Lord himself. Even if that king kept doing evil, sinful actions, and even if David had been anointed to take his place. Now, whatever the reason, David cannot make sense of Saul seeking him to kill him. He's best friends with the crown prince and married to the princess. Why would the king want him dead? So Jonathan listens to David's complaint and questions about Saul's motivations, but Jonathan doesn't even concern himself with the motivations because he cannot believe that his father would want David dead. Maybe Jonathan did not consider his father's earlier command to him to execute David as, not a real threat because he had immediately been talked out of it. But Jonathan thinks that there is not a way that his father has returned to his hate-filled feelings for David. If Saul had disclosed his plans of killing David before, there's no reason that he would keep them to himself this time. Jonathan thinks that he is so close to his father that he knows all of his father's plans. But as he will come to find out, his father has stopped telling him everything. Verse 3. But David vowed again, saying, "Your father knows well that I have found favor in your eyes, and he thinks, do not let Jonathan know this, lest he be grieved. But truly, as the Lord lives and as your soul lives, there is but a step between me and death." Then Jonathan said to David, "Whatever you say, I will do for you." Now, David pushes back against Jonathan's resistance to his accusations of Saul trying to kill him. David tells him that it is obvious why Saul is keeping the murder conspiracy from him. They are friends, and Saul knows how close that they are. So David says that their friendship is preventing Saul from telling Jonathan everything. Then David goes a step further from simply stating that he has been the target of his father's wrath. David swears in the name of the Lord that he is telling the truth about nearly being killed by Saul. For someone known to be as faithful as David is, this statement would have stopped any other argument in Jonathan's mind. David's faithfulness to the Lord would have prevented any kind of frivolous words about the Lord from coming out of his mouth. And so Jonathan may have never at this point heard David be so serious before as to invoke the name of the Lord in this way. So for him, everything changed when he finally realized how serious David was. So Jonathan surrenders to David's insistence and is now willing to listen to whatever plan he has about discovering Saul's plans and intentions. Look at verse 5. David said to Jonathan, "Behold, tomorrow is the new moon, and I should not fail to sit at table with the king. But let me go that I may hide myself in the field till the third day at evening." So David starts to tell Jonathan about a plan that he has come up with to get Saul to reveal his hidden agenda. The next day was set to be a day with a special celebratory feast when all of the important officials were to have dinner with the king. This was a feast expressly prescribed in the law in Numbers chapter 10, verse 10. So especially David, who was known to adhere to God's law, should be in attendance. Saul's observance of the new moon, as the passage reveals, had turned into a more than a one-day event. Saul's new moon festival stretched into at least 3 days during this period of time. It really sort of serves to demonstrate the confusion caused by Saul's afflicting spirit. One day, Saul is trying to kill David, and the next day, Saul expects David to attend a 3-day festival celebration. David knew that Saul would be expecting him to be at the celebration, so instead, David suggests that he should go and hide in the field. And notice that he specifically says the field instead of simply a field. This could be a reference back to 1 Samuel 19:3, where David hides in the field while Jonathan convinces Saul to stop trying to kill David the first time. It would seem that this could be David's common hiding place that no one knows about except for Jonathan and himself. So David's plan is to go and hide in that field for 3 days so that his absence will be quite conspicuous. Verse 6. "If your father misses me at all, then say, David earnestly asked of me to run to Bethlehem, his city, for there is a yearly sacrifice there for all the clan. If he says, good, it will be well for your servant. But if he is angry, then know that harm is determined by him. Therefore, deal kindly with your servant, for you have brought your servant into a covenant of the Lord with you. But if there is guilt in me, kill me yourself, for why should you bring me to your father?" Then David lays out the rest of the details of his plan. David fully anticipates that at some point during the 3-day festival, King Saul will comment on David's absence. It will be very noticeable that there is an empty seat, possibly between Jonathan and Michal. And so David preps Jonathan that the explanation for his absence should be a family obligation, which should be very understandable and acceptable by everyone. David does ask Jonathan to lie here. He is to deceive his evil and deceptive father in an effort to save David's life. And though the lie would violate the moral law, many taught that some laws could be violated to protect innocent life and thus keep the spirit of the law. But the reality is both that a sin is a sin, however it is disguised, and Jonathan was serving as a spy to reveal the heart of the man leading the nation astray. Then, if Saul is willing to accept David's absence as reasonable with kindness, then he does not at this time desire to kill him. However, if Saul responds to David's excuse with unreasonable anger, then he does, as David believes, want to kill him. And so David charges Jonathan to participate in this plan by reminding him of the covenant between the two of them. He tells him that if he had promised kindness and loyalty and faithfulness, so he must help David now. Then David gives Jonathan one more opportunity by telling him that if he has done anything deserving of death, then he would willingly accept that judgment at Jonathan's hand, he would willingly accept that judgment, death, at Jonathan's hand right then and there. And so Jonathan suddenly realizes David's seriousness when he invokes their covenant, and his willingness to die if he is guilty of a crime deserving death. Verse 9. And Jonathan said, "Far be it from you. If I knew that it was determined by my father that harm should come to you, would I not tell you?" Then David said to Jonathan, "Who will tell me if your father answers you roughly?" Who will tell me if your father answers you roughly? So undoubtedly, Jonathan still remembers his father's promise back in 1 Samuel 19:6 that no one would kill David. And he tells David that there's absolutely no way at all that he has done anything deserving of death. And then he replies that if he had heard of anything from his father or about his father from others concerning a conspiracy to kill David, he would certainly have told him. And this is now Jonathan reminding David of his faithfulness to their covenant, because he would under no circumstances keep that kind of information to himself. Jonathan is willing to believe David's sincerity, and David accepts Jonathan's sincerity. It is as though David now says, "Okay, I believe you. Now, if you discover anything, how are you going to get a message to me?" David has outlined the details of the plan as much as he has come up with, but the plan was still unfinished. He needs Jonathan's help to come up with the next part involving a method of communication. He hasn't quite figured out that part yet. And notice, David only wants to know if Saul answers Jonathan's excuse for David in anger. David is completely confident that he knows what the outcome of the reconnaissance will be. He doesn't even bring up the possibility of Saul demonstrating an understanding attitude because he knows that Saul really wants him dead. And this little fact-finding mission is for the benefit of Jonathan, so that his eyes will be opened to the truth. Verse 11. And Jonathan said to David, "Come, let us go out into the field." So they both went out into the field. And Jonathan said to David, "The Lord, the God of Israel, be witness. When I have sounded out my father about this time tomorrow, or the third day, behold, if he is well disposed towards David, shall I not then send and disclose it to you?" Now, Jonathan may want to get David and this conversation out and away from any potentially listening ears. So they go out to the field where David will end up hiding for the next several days during the festival. Then Jonathan, who has already been reminded of his covenant with David, declares in the name of the Lord that he will do it. He wants to make sure that David understands that he is fully committed to seeing this plan through to the end, even though it may reveal his own father as a bad guy. Notice also, whereas David had just mentioned his firm belief that Saul will respond poorly without mentioning the other possibility, here Jonathan not only mentions a favorable response, he mentions it first. He's still holding out hope that his father has been misunderstood by David. He's hoping that his father really does not have any evil intentions targeting David. David had only wanted to hear when Saul reveals his true nature of murderous intent, but Jonathan says that he will also let David know if Saul is not really mad at David and is in fact rather concerned for him. You know, sometimes we all tend to hold out hope for those we love, which seems to be exactly what Jonathan is doing here. Verse 13. But should it please my father to do you harm. The Lord do so to Jonathan and more also, if I do not disclose it to you and send you away, that you may go in safety. May the Lord be with you as he has been with my father. If I am still alive, show me the steadfast love of the Lord, that I may not die, and do not cut off your steadfast love from my house forever, when the Lord cuts off every one of the enemies of David from the face of the earth. Now, Jonathan gives David his ultimate pledge of loyalty and faithfulness. He has previously given him a covenantal promise, which should have been enough, but now he is promising to be loyal strictly to David, if it should come down to following Saul or following David. And Jonathan goes so far as to say that may the Lord do to him exactly what his father intends for David, if it is murder, and Jonathan does not tell David about it. He says that he is more than willing to defy his father in order to rescue David from any plot against him. He prays a blessing over David, in which is a full acknowledgement of a belief in the Lord's anointing of David as the next king. Even though by right and law, Jonathan should have expected to be the next king, Jonathan knew that the Lord superseded any royal succession plan that Saul had planned. Then he asks that when he is confirmed as king and Jonathan were to be still alive, that David would be kind to him and his family by not killing them. Now, our modern ears and minds would think that such a request was unnecessary, maybe even a little insulting between such close friends, but we need to remember that all that they knew about kings back then, these Israelites, 1000 or so BC, all they knew was what they had observed when the nations around them, because Saul was the first king. And whenever a new king arose to power who was not a descendant of the previous king, he would then kill every member of the previous king's family in order to protect the new lineage. So Jonathan is asking David to not be like everyone else and to spare him and his family if they are still alive. And David remembers this request many years later when he honors Jonathan's son Mephibosheth in 2 Samuel chapter 9. Look at verse 16. And Jonathan made a covenant with the house of David, saying, may the Lord take vengeance on David's enemies. And Jonathan made David swear again by his love for him, for he loved him as he loved his own soul. Jonathan's statement here, it's three things, really. It's a personal commitment, it's a prophecy, and it's a condemnation. You see, Jonathan was relinquishing his rights to the throne and throwing his support completely behind David. He was also possibly even unknowingly so. He was prophesying about what was to happen under David's reign. 2 Samuel 8:14 says that the Lord gave David victory against every enemy that he went out to face. And Saul personally considered David his enemy in 1 Samuel 18:29, and he openly said to his daughter Michal in 1 Samuel 19:17 that David was his enemy. So Jonathan, in saying that the Lord would give David victory, was condemning his own father with his declaration of blessing to David. He may still have been hoping that his father was innocent of David's accusation, but he also knew that there was the possibility that it was true. And if it was true that Saul had set himself up as the enemy of David, the Lord's faithfully anointed, then Jonathan was saying that he knows that the Lord will deal justly with all of those opposed to the Lord and his plans, even if that included his father. Then Jonathan wants to make sure that David will really take care of him and his family in the future. Surely, even though Jonathan did not want his father to have murderous intent, it would seem as though he highly suspected that David may have been right. And so Jonathan repeatedly insists on confirmation from David, and that reveals what he really anticipated the outcome to be. Verse 18. Then Jonathan said to him, tomorrow is the new moon, and you will be missed because your seat will be empty. On the third day, go down quickly to the place where you hid yourself when the matter was in hand, and remain beside the stone heap. Now finally, after all the insistence on assurances, Jonathan gets down to the details of communication. It will be very obvious to everyone at the festival that David is not there. He would have a very prominent seat as the king's personal musician, the king's greatest warrior, the king's wisest commander, his son's best friend, his daughter's husband. So every time someone looked towards the king and they see David's seat empty, it would be a glaring reality. David is supposed to remain hidden then, all throughout the festival. And then on the third day of the festival, he is to sneak out next to a great heap of stone. It is assumed that the stone heap was significant enough for David to hide beside quite easily without anyone even remotely being able to see him there. You see, where David spends the 3 days and how he is able to acquire food and water and necessities, it's not revealed because of David's hurry from Naioth. It doesn't seem very likely that he could have brought the supplies with him. It could be that on their way out to the field, Jonathan had packed up some supplies. It could also be that Jonathan went back into the palace, packed up some supplies to leave at a strategic location for David to retrieve. Or maybe David was a skilled enough hunter and scavenger as to be able to find food for the 3 days, and maybe a nearby stream supplied his water. There could have been any number of scenarios, but however the supplies came, David was to spend the 3 days in hiding and come out on the 3rd day. Verse 20. Jonathan still speaking. And he says, "And I will shoot 3 arrows to the side of it, as though I shot at a mark. And behold, I will send the boy, saying, Go find the arrows. If I say to the boy, Look, the arrows are on this side of you. Take them. Then you are to come, for as the Lord lives, it is safe for you, and there is no danger." So now Jonathan reveals the specifics of his communication plan. After the festival, Jonathan and a servant boy will go out to that very field for some target practice, and Jonathan will pretend to be shooting at a specific point in the field for a target. And after shooting 3 arrows, he will send the servant out into the field to retrieve the arrows. And whether or not the boy is able to find the arrows doesn't matter. Jonathan will shout instructions to him. If Jonathan acts as though the boy has gone too far into the field, and he says that he needs to come back towards him, then that is a signal to David. David will know that if the boy is told to come back closer to Jonathan, it's safe for David to come back to the palace with Jonathan. Saul will have responded with concern and compassion, and all will be safe. But notice that Jonathan again invokes the name of the Lord in his plan. He's swearing by the name of the Lord that he will be completely honest with David about whether or not it is safe to come home. He is swearing in the name of the Lord that he will not use this as an opportunity to trick and trap David, surrendering him into the hands of his father. And then Jonathan gives David the rest of his plan. Verse 22. "But if I say to the youth, Look, the arrows are beyond you, then go, for the Lord has sent you away. And as for the matter of which you and I have spoken, behold, the Lord is between you and me forever." So if Jonathan were to command his servant boy to go further away, then it is a signal to David that he is to go away. That will mean that Saul responded in anger to kill David, and that the Lord wanted David to go away for his own protection. Then Jonathan again wants to make absolutely sure that David does not forget his promise to take care of him and his family. He reminds him of the covenant that they had just made and had been reminded of. So Jonathan tells David to never forget that the covenant is for all time and will never expire. It really does seem as though Jonathan has come to resign himself to the fact of his father's sinfulness. And the scene is set for a confrontation, a revelation, and really a new season for the life of David. So thank you for joining us as we keep walking verse by verse through the entire Old Testament. Next week, we will see what happens when Jonathan goes in and the festival takes place, and Saul's response when finding out David is not going to come to dinner.